I got this story from a message that didn't look like it belonged on the internet. No emojis. No dramatic subject line. Just a few plain words that read like a warning you'd tape to a door. Don't fish the still water. The man who sent it didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for credit. He didn't even ask me to believe him. He only asked that if I told it clean. No exaggeration, no jokes, no creepypasta voice. He said he was a local to the Ohio River, a fisherman his whole life, and a retired soldier who'd seen enough real fear to know the difference between panic and instinct. He wrote that people don't always drown in the Ohio River. Sometimes they just vanish. He wrote that rescue teams will tell you the current took them, that the barges make it dangerous, that it's deep and cold and unpredictable. He said all of that is true, and he said none of that is the reason certain stretches of the river go quiet, like the world is holding its breath. He had a name for what lived under those stretches, a name he said most old locals won't say out loud. Not because it's magic, because saying it feels like looking directly at something you're better off pretending you didn't see. He called it the Ohio Leviathan, and he said he'd only seen it surface a handful of times in his life. But he'd felt it a lot more than that. What follows is his account, in his words, as close as I can keep it. I don't tell stories for attention. I'm not wired that way. Never was. I grew up around men who talked with their hands and kept their faces still, and I spent a lot of my life being trained to speak only when it mattered. If somebody's reading this because they want a campfire tale, they'll be disappointed. This is just a thing that happened. More than once. And it's still happening, whether folks want to admit it or not. I'm not putting my real name in here. That's not fear. That's common sense. People get brave when they're behind a screen, and the river doesn't care about bravery. I'm in my late 50s. I've lived close enough to the Ohio River that it's been the soundtrack of my life. When I was a kid, the river was how you told time. The fog rolling in meant morning. The barges meant afternoon. The way the water changed color after rain meant you'd better stay off it for a while. My father fished it. My grandfather fished it. Their fathers too. Back far enough that nobody remembers the first name. It wasn't romantic. It was groceries. It was rent. It was a kind of knowledge that lived in your hands. Then I left. Joined the military. Came back older and quieter and more interested in how things work than in what people say about them. I did my time, got out, and the river was still there, doing what it always does, moving, waiting, taking. Most of what happens on the Ohio River has an explanation. People drink. People don't wear life jackets. People fall off docks in the dark. People think they can swim farther than they can. They underestimate how fast a current can change, how cold water can steal the strength out of your arms, how a barge wake can slap a small boat sideways. I've seen accidents. I've helped clean up after them. I've pulled people out when there was still time, and I've pulled people out when there wasn't. But every once in a while, something happens that doesn't fit the usual shape of a river death. And if you grow up here, you hear about those things the same way you hear about storms that tore up the town long before you were born. Not as entertainment, as weather, as part of the place. When I was a boy, my grandfather had rules. He wasn't a superstitious man. He'd fight anybody who called him that. He didn't keep charms. He didn't pray to the river. He didn't talk to the moon. But he had rules. Don't go out alone after dark if the water's too still. Don't whistle on the river at night. Don't follow a voice you can't place. And if you ever see the water move against itself, if you ever see a line on the surface sliding the wrong way, get off the river. Not later. Now. When I asked him why, he'd say something like, "Because I told you so," or he'd give me the look that meant I'd pushed too hard and didn't understand what I was asking. Once, when I was older, when I thought I was old enough to handle an answer, I asked again. We were sitting outside, and the air smelled like mud and frying fish. The river was somewhere out there, not far. You could hear a barge horn, low and lazy. He stared at the dark line of trees for a long time. Then he said, "The river's got teeth you can't see." That was all. Back then, the stories came from the older guys. Men who worked the docks. Men who ran small boats. Men who'd been out there so long their skin looked carved. You'd hear them in pieces. Half sentences in a bait shop. A story that stops when a customer walks in. A laugh that doesn't match the words. My favorite one, when I was young and still stupid, was about a fisherman who hooked something so heavy it dragged his boat upstream. Upstream. Not in a playful way, not in a big fish runs hard way, in a steady pull like a tow line. The man fought it for a while, thinking it was the catch of his life. He braced his feet. He leaned back. He told his buddy to grab the net. And then the water beside the boat rose. Not splashed. Rose. Like a piece of the river stood up to look at them. They cut the line. The man who told that story always ended it the same way. You don't win every tug of war. Another one came from a dock worker who'd spent most of his life around barges. He said there are shadows under barges that don't belong to the barge. He said he watched something roll under one on a calm day, slow and heavy, big enough that for a second it changed the way the river reflected the sky. Like a dark cloud passed under the surface. He told his buddy, and his buddy told him to shut up. But later, when they were alone, that same buddy said, "I saw it too." They didn't report it. Report it to who? The river? Then there were the stories about fish. People think fish stories are always exaggerations. Some are. But sometimes the story isn't about the size. It's about the way the fish looked. I've seen catfish with scars that looked like they'd brushed against something rougher than rock. I've seen fish with their bodies bent wrong, like pressure had gotten them, not teeth. You'd pull them up and feel your stomach turn because you couldn't picture what could do that down there. The older guys would spit and say it was the dam, or the barges, or pollution. And maybe it was, but they'd say it too fast, like they were trying to convince themselves. There was one bend of the river that everybody in my town treated like it had bad weather hovering over it, even on clear nights. We had nicknames for it. Different generations called it different things. The name I heard most was Dead Man's Elbow. It wasn't official. It was just the place where the river made a certain curve and the banks got steep and the water got deep, and the current did things you couldn't see from the surface. Kids dared each other to go there at night. Teenagers parked near it to drink. People did dumb things there, the way people always do around water. The older fishermen didn't, not after dark. If you asked why, you'd get a shrug. Just don't. That was the culture of it. Not fear like screaming. Fear like stepping around a loose board because you know what happens if you put weight on it. When I came back from the military, the river felt the same and different at the same time. It had more traffic, bigger barges, more lights along the banks, more people who treated it like a playground instead of a living thing. But the water still had that mood to it. It still changed without warning. It still carried logs and debris after storms like it was cleaning out its throat. I got a small boat and went back to fishing, not for survival, but because it was the only place my mind got quiet. There's a kind of silence out there that doesn't exist on land. Even with barges, even with the world humming, the river has a way of making you focus on what's right in front of you. That's part of why it took me so long to accept what I'm about to describe. Because I didn't want it. I didn't want the river to be anything more than what it already is. Dangerous in the way nature is dangerous. Honest danger. Predictable if you respect it. The first time I felt something that didn't fit that picture, I tried hard to explain it away. It was night. Not late enough that you'd call it morning, but late enough that the houses along the bank had gone dark and the only lights were street lights far back and the occasional glow from a dock. The air was warm, the kind of warm that makes fog later. I was alone. That was already a mistake, according to my grandfather's rules. But I was older and stubborn and thought rules were for people who needed them. The river was too calm. That's the first thing that should have made me go home. If you know the Ohio, you know it almost always has some movement on top, some ripple, some little chop, even on a quiet night. That night, it looked like poured oil. The surface held the moon like a mirror. No insects, no frogs. Even the distant sound of traffic seemed muted, like the air was thick. I remember thinking, for a second, that it was peaceful. that it was the kind of night people romanticize. Then, I felt the boat shift, not from a wake, not from wind, from below. It wasn't a violent jolt. It was a gentle lift on one side, like a hand under the hull had pushed up and let go. The boat rocked once and settled. I held my breath without realizing I was doing it. Sometimes logs bump you. Sometimes a fish hits the underside. Sometimes you drift into an eddy and the current changes. So I told myself it was one of those things. Then I felt it again. This time there was a vibration too, a low hum that traveled through the boat and into my feet. It reminded me of standing near heavy machinery. The sound wasn't in the air. It was in the water. I glanced at my depth finder. The screen flickered like it was struggling. The numbers jumped, then went blank, then came back wrong. I tapped it. I checked the wires. Everything looked normal. Then the screen went dark again, and in the same moment, the water beside the boat changed. Not splashed, not rippled. It domed, like something large had risen close under the surface and displaced water without breaking it. The moon reflection bent. The mirror warped. I leaned over, because I'm an idiot, and stared. I saw a shape. That's all I can honestly say. A shape under black water, moving slow, long enough that my brain couldn't fit it into fish or log. It wasn't rushing. It wasn't feeding. It was just there, sliding. And the worst part wasn't the size. It was the control. When a big creature moves in water, you expect turbulence. You expect some sign of force. This moved like it owned the water and didn't need to fight it. The shape turned just slightly. Not a sharp turn like something startled. A smooth adjustment, like something changing its angle to see better. And then it passed under the boat. When it did, the boat lifted a fraction, like you were floating over a submerged hill that wasn't there a second ago. I sat very still and didn't look down again. I didn't pray. I didn't shout. I didn't fire a gun like some people would pretend they'd do. I did the only smart thing I could do. I started the motor and left. I didn't race. I didn't want sudden noise. I moved like I was backing away from something that could hear panic. When I got home, I told myself it had been a big sturgeon, or a log with weird current, or my depth finder glitching. For days, I clung to those explanations. Then I went to the bait shop and mentioned, casually, that my electronics had acted strange near Deadman's elbow. The man behind the counter didn't ask what I was using, didn't ask what brand, didn't ask if I'd checked the battery. He just said, "You were out there at night?" I said yes. He nodded once, slow, like I'd confirmed something. Then he changed the subject. "That's how it goes here. Nobody wants to be the first one to say the thing out loud." After that night, I started paying attention to stories I used to ignore. Not because I was chasing monsters, because I wanted my river back. I wanted to pin what I'd seen to something normal and put it away. The best way to do that is to gather facts until the mystery collapses. It didn't collapse. It got bigger. People disappear on the Ohio River. That's not news. Every summer, somebody who can't swim decides they can. Somebody drinks too much and slips off a bank. Somebody jumps from a bridge like it's a joke. But the older you get, the more you notice the ones that don't make sense. Like when a boat flips close to shore in calm weather and the life jackets pop up like bright flowers, and you find the boat, and you find a cooler, and you find somebody's shoe, and you find nothing else. People will tell you bodies drift, that they get stuck in snags, that they sink, that they move downstream. All true. But sometimes, when you've been around long enough, you know when downstream is an excuse people use because they don't want to picture what really happened in the dark under their feet. There was a man I knew from town who went out with his nephew one late afternoon. Not a storm day, not a crazy day. Just warm, muggy weather that makes the river smell like weeds. They didn't come back. The boat washed up the next morning against a muddy bank. The motor was still attached. The fuel line wasn't cut. The anchor line was snapped like it had been pulled too hard. The cooler was gone. The official story was that they hit something and went over, or they stood up and lost balance. or they got caught in a current. A few people searched along the bank for days. A few people ran lines in the water for weeks. Eventually, folks stopped looking the way they always do when life demands you move on. But the part nobody liked talking about was that the life jackets had been found, floating a few miles apart, like someone had set them down. When you drown, you fight, you thrash, you grab, you cling, you make noise. When those jackets were found, there weren't signs of a struggle on them. No torn straps, no mud ground into the fabric, no broken buckles, just jackets, like the river had returned them politely. Another story came from a rescue volunteer I trust. He'd been on enough calls to be numb to most of them. He told me about a teenage kid who'd been found alive after a boating accident, clinging to a piece of driftwood near dusk. The kid was shaking so hard they thought he was in shock from the cold. They got him wrapped, got him water, asked him what happened. He stared at the river like it was still happening. He kept shaking his head. Finally, he said, "It bumped us." That was it. No, we hit a log. No, a barge wake. Just it. And when the volunteer asked, "What bumped you?" the kid started crying in a way that didn't sound like fear. It sounded like humiliation. Like he couldn't believe he was saying it, even in his own head. He whispered, "Something from under." Then he wouldn't speak again. People tried to explain it away. Trauma makes your brain do weird stuff. He was in shock. He imagined it. Maybe. But the volunteer told me something else. He said the water around the driftwood was calmer than the water around it. Like a still patch followed him, or like the river had pressed down to keep him quiet. That detail stuck to me. Still patches. I began to notice how often people mentioned still water in these stories. Not calm weather. Not a flat day. A patch, specific, like a bruise on the surface. One summer, on a day so hot it made the air waver, I was out fishing early and saw something that turned my stomach in a different way. The river was moving. The surface had little ripples. Birds were out. Everything looked normal. Then I saw a circle of water that wasn't. It was smoother than the rest, like someone had laid a sheet of glass on top. It wasn't big enough to be a calm bay. It wasn't near the bank. It was just there, drifting, sliding in a way that didn't match the current. I watched it for a while, because I have a problem where I think watching something makes it less dangerous. The circle moved against the flow, slow and steady. I pulled up my anchor and moved away. Later, I mentioned it to an older fisherman who'd been around longer than me. He didn't laugh. He said, "You see any birds over it?" I said no. He nodded, like that settled the matter. Then he told me a story from his youth, about a night when he and his brother were fishing near Deadman's Elbow. The water went still, the frogs stopped, and a smell came up from the river like rusted pennies and old meat. He said they didn't see anything. They just felt the boat get heavy, like it was sinking without taking on water, like something under them had risen and held them. They didn't move until the stillness passed. He said his brother never fished that bend again. When I asked what he thought it was, he shrugged. "You can call it what you want," he said. "Just don't call it close." That's another thing about river people. They'll talk around a truth until you're tired. They'll hand you a warning without giving you a shape to put it in. Part of it is pride. Part of it is fear of being laughed at. But part of it? This is what I believe now, is that the moment you name something, you admit it's real. And if it's real, you have to decide what to do about it. And what do you do about something that lives in a river? I made lists in my head. Soldier habit. If I couldn't fight it, I could at least understand it. Here's what kept showing up, across different stories, from people who didn't know each other and had no reason to coordinate lies. Deep bends. Places where the channel drops hard and the current runs weird under the surface. Flood seasons. Not every flood, but often enough that you noticed. Still patches. Water that looks pressed flat, like a hand smoothing a bedsheet. A lack of sound. Birds avoiding certain spots. Frogs stopping. Insects going quiet. And then, when something happened, the evidence didn't match the story. Not always. Not every time. The river is still the river. It still kills the normal way. But every once in a while, someone went missing, and the river behaved like it was covering its tracks. I didn't call it the Leviathan then. That name came later, from a man old enough that his hands shook when he poured coffee. I met him near a public ramp one morning, early, when fog was low and the sun looked like a dull coin. He saw me watching the water and said, "You ever see the still water?" I said yes. He nodded once and looked away, like he didn't want to look at the place he was talking about. He told me his father used to talk about a thing in the Ohio River that people used to call a serpent, or a dragon, or just the feeder. He said the word Leviathan like it tasted bad. He said, "It's old, older than our towns, older than the dams. It ain't a fish, and it ain't a story." Then he said something that made my skin crawl. He said, "It doesn't eat like an animal. It takes." I asked him what he meant. He looked at me for a long time and said, "You ever notice how some people don't come back up?" I said yes. He said, "That's what I mean." I went home that day and tried to laugh about it with my wife. Tried to make it a joke, because jokes are how you keep fear at arm's length. The laugh died in my throat when I realized I was only joking to avoid thinking. After that, I became careful, not paranoid. Careful. I stopped fishing certain stretches after dark. I stopped going alone at night, even when the weather looked perfect. I started paying attention to the small cues that tell you the river is about to change its mind. And, for a while, nothing happened. That's another reason people don't believe these stories. The river can go quiet for months, years, long enough that you tell yourself you imagined it, long enough that you start to relax. Then something reminds you. The second time I saw it clearly, I wasn't out there for fish. A storm had come through a day earlier. Not the kind that destroys a town, but the kind that drops enough rain upriver to change the river's mood. The Ohio can be calm where you are and raging miles away, and those miles matter. A friend called me late afternoon. Someone's small boat had stalled near a bad stretch. They'd managed to call before their phone got wet. The current was pushing them sideways. They were drifting toward a place I didn't like. I don't play hero. I'm not built like that. But I've been around enough to know that if you have a boat, and you have experience, and you have a chance to stop something from turning into a recovery, you go. So I went. The sky was gray. The air was thick. The river was higher than usual, carrying debris, branches, pieces of trash, stuff you don't want hitting your hull. As I got closer to the stretch they described, I saw the first sign. Birds were flying along the banks, but not over the center. It's subtle, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. But birds don't avoid empty air for no reason. I slowed down. Then I saw the second sign, a still patch. Not a gentle calm. A pressed, flat section of water, oval-shaped, sitting in the middle of moving current like it didn't belong. The water around it flowed and rippled. The patch didn't. The boat I was heading toward was near that patch, drifting closer to it like it was being pulled by something you couldn't see. I waved. They waved back, frantic. 2 people. A couple maybe, both wearing life jackets at least. Their boat was angled wrong, bow turned like they'd lost steering. Their motor was up. I could see them trying to fix something. I approached from the side, ready to throw a line. And then the air changed. That's the best way I can describe it. Like the temperature dropped a little, but not enough to see your breath. Like the smell changed too. A hint of metal. Mud stirred up from deep down. The water under my boat vibrated. That low hum again, like distant machinery. I felt my stomach tighten the way it used to tighten before something went wrong overseas. That animal sense that doesn't explain itself. The still patch moved. Not with the current. It slid sideways, quiet, until it was under the couple's boat. Their boat rocked gently, like a wave passed under it. The man in the boat looked down and froze. He didn't scream. He didn't shout. He stared into the water like he'd seen something that emptied his lungs. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say a word. No sound came out. Then the boat dipped again, just a little, like something had pushed up from below and let go. The woman grabbed the side of the boat, knuckles white. She looked at me, eyes huge, and said something I couldn't hear over the motor and the river. The man did something that broke my heart because it was such a human, helpless thing. He stood up. He stood up like he was trying to see better, like standing would give him control. The moment he stood, he was gone. Not thrown, not flipped, not dragged in a visible way. He was there, and then there was empty space where he had been. No splash. That's what people don't understand. They picture drowning as chaos, arms and water and noise. This was quiet. The woman screamed then, a raw sound that sliced right through the river noise. She dropped to her knees, clinging to the boat, looking over the side like she was trying to see him under the surface. I killed my motor and threw my line hard, hands moving before my brain caught up, because training is like that. The line landed across their bow. She grabbed it, sobbing. I started pulling them toward me, inch by inch, fighting the current. As I pulled, my boat drifted closer to the still patch, and I saw it. Not the whole thing. Not some perfect monster reveal like a movie. I saw a curve of dark beneath the surface, thicker than my torso, running under the pressed flat water. I saw a ridge along it, a subtle rise that made the surface tension change. And I saw scars, pale lines against dark hide, like old wounds healed long ago. Then, for a second, the water bulged and something broke the surface. A back. That's what it looked like. A section of back, glossy and black, rising slow, not thrashing, not gasping, just emerging like it had all the time in the world. Water slid off it in sheets. No head, no eyes. Just a portion of something that didn't need to show itself fully to prove it was there. The woman saw it too. Her scream changed. The pitch shifted into something else. Shock, disbelief, the sound of a mind rejecting what it's seeing. I pulled harder. The Leviathan sank. When it sank, the still patch disappeared, like the river released its breath. Ripples rushed in. The surface went back to normal movement. But my boat didn't. My boat rocked as if something large had passed beneath it, close enough that the displacement lifted me. I didn't look down. I kept pulling the line, hauling the woman toward me, telling her to keep her weight low, telling her to look at me, not the water, because I didn't know what else to do. When I got her close enough, I reached out and grabbed her wrist, hard, and pulled her into my boat. She was shaking so violently her teeth clicked. Her eyes kept flicking to the water behind us like she expected it to rise again. She kept saying his name, over and over. And the thing that tore at me was that I knew, in my gut, I wasn't going to find him. Not the way you find a body. I started my motor and got us out of there as fast as the river would let me. We called it in. We gave coordinates. People came. Rescue boats. Lights. Voices. Radios. The whole machine that makes people feel like control is possible. They searched. They found nothing. No blood. No debris. No sign he'd hit his head. No sign he'd been pulled under by the current. His life jacket never surfaced. His body never came up. They told the woman he probably drifted downstream. They told her bodies can take time. They told her the river is unpredictable. All true. But I watched her face when they said it. I watched the part of her that had seen the same curve of dark under the still patch. I watched her nod, like she was accepting the only explanation anyone would allow. And I knew she was doing what we all do. She was trading truth for comfort, because truth doesn't come with a plan. After that incident, I stopped pretending. I didn't go on the internet. I didn't call a reporter. I didn't start telling kids ghost stories. I just got quiet. And I started talking carefully to the people who would understand. A retired bargeman told me, with his eyes on his coffee, that sometimes you feel something under the toe that isn't a log. Something that nudges, not collides. Something that makes the water behind you go unnaturally smooth. A river patrol guy told me there are calls they log as possible drowning that make no sense. People disappear close to shore. People vanish in water that should spit them back out. An older rescue volunteer told me the same thing. The old man had implied. Some recoveries don't happen because there's nothing to recover. River takes them, he said, like it was a proverb. When I asked him if he meant current, he stared at me. No, he said. I mean, takes them. That's the point where you either accept you're crazy or accept the river is more complicated than you want it to be. I chose complicated. Over the next stretch of time, months, then years, I noticed something else. The disappearances that didn't make sense weren't random. They clustered. Not perfectly, not like a clock you can set your watch to, but enough that if you've spent your life around patterns, you can't ignore it. Certain bends, certain deep channels, certain seasons when the water swells and the river expands into old places it doesn't usually touch. After long rains, when the river rises and looks like it's reclaiming land, that's when the still patches showed up most. That's when the animals acted strange. That's when, if you listened to local chatter, you'd hear about someone who went in and didn't come out. And here's the part that made me sick when I finally let myself think it all the way through. We treat flood season like the river is angry. But what if it's not anger? What if it's movement? What if the river rises because that's when the Leviathan travels? When it can slide into places it can't reach during low water? When it can feed without being seen? That sounds crazy, I know, but I've seen too many things now to be comforted by crazy. There was one more incident that sealed it for me. The one that made me decide to write this down, even though I hate the idea of it living online. It happened on a night the town was loud. There was an event down by the water music, food, lights, people packed along the banks like the river was a stage. Boats out on the water too, anchored and drifting. Folks laughing and yelling, treating the river like it was a big dark park. I stayed away from the worst of it. I'm not a crowd person, but I went out anyway because nights like that bring trouble, and trouble on the river turns into bodies if nobody's paying attention. The river looked almost beautiful, with all those lights trembling on the surface. That's how it gets you. It convinces you it's harmless. I was a little downstream from the main cluster of boats, watching. Then I saw a small boat, a cheap fishing boat, not built for crowds, drifting away from the others. Probably somebody's anchor slipped. Probably their motor had trouble. It happens all the time. 2 people on it. I could tell by the posture, one standing, one seated, both looking toward the bank like they were trying to find someone. They were drifting toward a deep stretch. I started my motor, slow, and eased in their direction. That's when the sound shifted. It's hard to explain sound on water. It carries weird. Noise from shore becomes a smear. But there are moments when you can feel the river swallowing noise, like the water itself is absorbing it. As I moved closer, the noise from the festival seemed to dim just slightly, like my ears were plugged. And in the middle of moving water, I saw it. A still patch. Bigger than the one I'd seen during the rescue. Wide enough that it looked like a stain. The moonlight on it didn't ripple. The reflections from shore didn't break. The surface looked pressed, held down. The small boat drifted toward it. I waved. I shouted. I don't even remember what I said. Something like, turn around, or start your motor, or get out of there. One of them looked at me. I saw confusion, then irritation, like I was some stranger yelling for no reason. Then their boat touched the edge of the still patch. Not physically. There was no line you could see. But the moment they crossed into that smoother water, their boat's movement changed. It slowed. Like the current wasn't holding it anymore. Like the river was cradling it. The person standing leaned over the side, maybe trying to see what was wrong. And then again, that quiet absence. Gone. No splash. The person seated screamed and grabbed for them, hands grabbing air, eyes wild. They looked at me like they'd just watched reality tear. I gunned my motor then because subtlety didn't matter anymore. I cut through the water, weight be damned, and aimed for them. As I approached, my depth finder flickered and died. The air smelled like metal. The water around their boat began to dome, gently, the way it had the first time I'd seen the shape under my hull years ago. The seated person tried to stand. I yelled for them to stay down. I don't know if they heard me. The boat rocked, just once, like something beneath it rolled. And then I saw the back again, a long, dark curve rising under the surface, close enough that the pressure made ripples on the surrounding water, but not on the still patch itself. The still patch stayed smooth, like a lid. The back broke the surface for a moment, not high, not dramatic, just enough. This time, I saw more detail. The hide looked thick, tough, textured like old rubber. There were scars, layered, some straight, some jagged, like it had been cut by metal at some point in its life. A barge prop, maybe. Or something else. And then, near the waterline, I saw something that makes my throat close even now. A shape that might have been a fin, or a ridge, or a raised spine. Something that suggested this wasn't a fish, wasn't a log, wasn't any animal I'd ever pulled from these waters. The seated person screamed again and threw themselves toward the center of the boat. The Leviathan sank. When it sank, the still patch loosened, ripples rushing in like a breath released. I reached the boat and threw a line. The person grabbed it with both hands like they were drowning in air. I hauled them toward me, hands burning, heart slamming, and I got them into my boat the same way I'd gotten the woman during the rescue, by force and urgency and a kind of rage at the river. They were sobbing, repeating, "It took them," over and over, like saying it made it real and unbearable. We got away. We called it in. And this time, because it happened near a crowd, because it happened during a public event, there were witnesses. People on shore who saw a boat drift oddly, people who heard a scream, people who saw a commotion. But nobody saw the taking. They saw the before and after. They saw a person missing and water that looked normal again. And once again, the official explanation became the only one anyone allowed. They fell. They drowned. They drifted. They searched. They did their jobs. They did what people do to make grief feel orderly. No body. No life jacket. Just absence. After that night, I couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. I started thinking back through the elder stories. The hook that dragged a boat upstream. The shadow under the barge. The bend everybody avoids. The whistling rule. Those weren't separate tales. They were warnings about the same thing, told in the only language people had for it. Avoidance, superstition, half-jokes that weren't jokes. My grandfather didn't call it the Leviathan. He didn't need the name. He knew the rules. Here's what I believe now, and I'm not asking anyone to carve it into stone. I'm just saying what fits the evidence I've seen with my own eyes. The Ohio River has always had something in it that isn't supposed to be part of modern life. Something old. Something that survived the dams and the industry and the noise, because water hides what it wants to hide. I don't know if it's one creature or if it's a kind. I don't know if it breeds. I don't know if it sleeps, but I know it's there. And I know it doesn't hunt like an animal we understand. It doesn't chase boats. It doesn't thrash. It doesn't announce itself. It waits. It finds a place where the river itself can help it. A deep bend. A channel. A stretch where current can confuse. A night when sound will smear and witnesses will see nothing but ripples. Then it presses the surface flat. It makes a still patch like a lid. And when something crosses into that patch, it takes it. Clean. Quiet. Efficient. People ask why bodies don't come up sometimes. They say it's because the river is deep. They say it's because snags hold them. They say it's because the current carries them far. All true, sometimes. But I think, sometimes, the reason is simpler. Sometimes, there's nothing to find. Sometimes, the river doesn't return what was taken because it wasn't taken by the current. It was taken by something that lives under the current. I thought about my grandfather's rules. Don't go out alone after dark if the water's too still. Don't whistle on the river at night. Don't follow a voice you can't place. And if you ever see the water move against itself, if you ever see a line on the surface sliding the wrong way, get off the river. Now, I understand something I didn't understand as a kid. Those rules weren't superstition. They were survival. The river doesn't care if you believe in monsters. The river doesn't care if you grew up here or you're visiting. It doesn't care if you're drunk, sober, brave, careful, young, old. It moves. It waits. And something in it moves too. So here's my warning, for whoever needs it. Don't swim in the Ohio River at night. Don't do it for a dare. Don't do it because you think you're strong. Water steals strength, and then it steals choices. Don't trust calm water, especially not calm water in the middle of moving current. If you see a still patch that looks like the surface has been pressed flat, treat it like a hole. If you're on a boat and your electronics start acting wrong in deep bends, don't shrug it off. Leave. You can tell yourself later it was a glitch, but leave first. And if you hear locals avoid certain stretches without explaining why, don't mock them. Those people have watched the river longer than you have. People say the Ohio River is dangerous because it's deep. They're wrong. It's dangerous because something down there learned how to wait. And once it decides you've crossed into its part of the river, it doesn't fight you. It doesn't have to. It just takes you, quietly, like you were never there. And yeah, that's it for today. If you liked this one, hit like, subscribe, all that good stuff. It actually helps a lot, and feel free to send it to a friend who's into creepy stories. Thanks for watching. I've got more waiting for you on screen, so enjoy.